great you are. So I first met Raymond, I think, well, actually there's an amazing bit in the book when he's talking about getting into the London poetry scene in like the early 2010s. I think that's when we first met. In fact, there's a description in the book, and I think I was at this same gig you described, and as soon as you started describing the poet on stage, I was like, I was there. This was a poetry and music night. We stood at the front, glaring up at the stage, at a blokey cockney with short brown cropped hair, a long brown coat and boots, part punk, part rockabilly. Tim, this is a poet called Tim Wells. He looked like the kind of man that hid a baseball bat up his trench coat, which made the tenderness of some of his poems even more moving to me. So yeah, that's how we met in this really amazing scene as poets, and we've kind of been crossing over ever since then, and it's been a real pleasure to see be alongside Ray quite a bit. So he, as we'll learn when we get into the book, he was born. Have you ever had an event closer to where you were born than where you are right now? He was born in the Homerton Hospital in 1986. His book, The Perseverance, I was in the audience when it won the Folio Prize. I was with a bunch of poets, in fact, when it won the Folio Prize. No poet has ever won the Folio Prize before Raymond did, and we were all very excited at the idea that a poet could win that prize, because it's a prize for all genres. As we were talking a minute ago, Ray is now a global figure. He's works loads in America. He was on the Griffin Prize, which is, I would argue, the biggest. He was shortlisted for that prize, probably the biggest poetry prize in the world. I want to talk to you about the Evelyn Glennie stuff, but he's worked with Evelyn Glennie, amazing percussionist, made an album with her. Anyway, Ray is so big time. He's amazing. He's just one of the best poets out there. He's a lovely man. So please welcome him. We're really happy to have him here in Hackney. We also have with us Sharon, who's doing the interpreting. We had a very fun conversation a minute ago where Sharon was telling us some of the slang BSL terms that she uses when she's working. Sharon, could you give us some example of some slang BSL?
I'll give you some polite. But I need to use my hand.
Hang on. Everyone can hear you, I think.
Okay. Road man. The road man.
Road man.
Do it again. Road man. But it must have the attitude. He's a road man. A lovely looking lady. That's my shorty. My shorty.
Thank you very much. So yeah, welcome. Thanks everyone for coming. And now we're going to get into it. We're going to have some readings as we go through. Oh, I've already broken that. Ray's going to do a reading now. We're going to have a chat. He's going to do another reading, a bit more chat, and then there's going to be a Q&A. So that's how things are going to go. Ray, do you want to start with a reading from the book?
Sure. Okay, actually I'm going to start. Hello, good evening, thank you for coming. How many people here know the sign for Hackney? Well, but it's not, we're just talking about attitude. It's not just the attitude. Hackney, back in the day, used to be one of the main places in London where they had cows. There's actually a cowbell There you go. That's why we need more BSL linguists and people doing the etymology of the sign. It's incredible. Anyway. Oh yeah, exactly, yeah. Cows in the marshes. The marshes used to be a lot bigger. Okay, so I'm going to read a section. Oh, just to say, Joe, thanks so much for that introduction. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I'm going to read a section called What's Good About Being Deaf. It's just a couple pages into it. What's good about being deaf? I met Thomas when I was visiting a school in Durham in 2017. His teachers whisked me away after I delivered an assembly on poetry to a packed hall of 11 to 16-year-olds to sit me in a room with him, a hazel-haired, round-headed 11-year-old who had 2 large silver hearing aids in his ears. He kept his head down on the table as his teachers helicoptered over him. Thomas was the only deaf student in the school, and the overzealous hearing teachers gathered Thomas and me in a quiet room to meet each other. So, Thomas, said one of the teachers, kneeling beside him, this is a poet. He wears hearing aids like you. Another teacher butted in, yes, what do you have to say about being deaf, Thomas? None of the teachers knew sign. Even the fact that sometimes they spoke without facing him showed me that Thomas wasn't in a room that was accommodating his needs. Thomas kept his head down and finally said, it's useless. I told Thomas that I felt useless at his age too, that I had internalized this idea that my deafness decreased my value and limited my future, employment and romantic. I explained that I had spent decades pushing against this notion. Deafness is harder when you have to rely on people who aren't deaf to understand you, people who don't have the patience to face you when they talk or speak sign, or know when to pause in conversation when there's a loud noise like an alarm going off or a truck bustling down the street. One of the teachers, perhaps feeling accused and that my words were negative, interrupted again. Yes, but look at him, Thomas. He's now a famous poet. It's funny, like calling myself famous, like it startled me so much that I lost my line. Thomas lifted his head from the table, stared at me, thinking then, asked. Thomas lifted his head from the table, stared at me, thinking, then asked, are poets useful? Well, I said, that's a good question, and intelligent people ask good questions. Thomas fidgeted with his thumbs. I think there is a power in finding ways to articulate your unique self in the world, a useful power. Poetry helped me, even if it was just a way to temporarily lift or lighten the narrative of the world, even if it didn't always transform my truths and traumas. At times it stopped me spiraling into the story of being the boy who stood low in rank along a long line of other boys who I thought were more clever, more beautiful, more rich, more worthy. I was a boy who wanted to blend in. Blending in looked easier, calmer. I was a boy who didn't want to look like the enemy of any system, even a system that hated me. And I know I succeeded despite the system. I thought of Thomas when I began doing readings of my first children's picture book, Can Bears Ski, a story based on my own experience growing up deaf with hearing parents who struggled to guide me through the hearing world. Part of the purpose of the story is to show deafness as an experience rather than a trauma. During those first readings, I got a range of questions from deaf young readers. Some engaged with the story, asking, why does the moon have a face? And can the bears sign? And there were young readers looking at the other faces on the Zoom call and asking, how many people here have cochlear implants? Another question was, does anyone here have red hearing aids? But a common question I received was, what's good about being deaf? There is an innocence to this question, but there's also a self-consciousness, one that some would say ought to not exist for children so young, but alas, from birth, we're lucky to be born in a room that isn't ableist, let alone a world. Forgive me, I'm not trying to be grandiose. I didn't mean for poetry to give me a platform for sweeping statements of self-affirmation. For a long time, my poetry was private. It helped me hide. I hid behind poetic thought, in part because it was an intellectual activity that asserted my potential usefulness. In reality, I had no idea what a deaf, racially ambiguous boy could offer the real world. Happy National Poetry Day, everybody.
Thank you, Ray. That was great to hear that. So that gives you a fairly good sense of the subject of the book, and it beautifully explores the complexity of all those questions, that the children are asking. What's good about being deaf? Are poets useful? This is an important question. I thought about that question. Are poets useful? Which you answer beautifully in that section, but you've been writing your poetry often inspired by your experiences as a deaf person and growing up in London and all these things. What was it that made you want to switch over to writing a memoir? I guess are memoirists useful? What was what was the decision that made this? What could you do differently with a memoir that you couldn't do in your poems?
Okay, so before I answer this, forgive me, Joe, but I'm just going to give you a quick plug.
Oh gosh.
Children of Radium is an amazing memoir. Fucking hell, man. So, when this came out, I was asked to read this and host it for Joe's launch in Margate, and you were like the perfect person to speak to as a poet who's also written this memoir, which is also around family, around language, around secrecy and revelation, all of that stuff. Anyway, I just want to say memoir.
I'll take it. I'll take it. Yeah.
And so, but I say that to say I'm relieved actually that there are poets that you writing in this form, because I kind of think of the book that I wrote as it's almost, you might relate to this, you can tell me if you do, like a kind of reluctant memoir, because I didn't know I was writing a memoir until I finished the book and someone in publishing said, "Oh, a memoir." And I said, "You take that back." Because nowadays when we think of memoirs, we think of Tell-All, Prince Harry, like the celebrity memoir, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's something about that.
But the way you, in that section you read, you kind of like nudged towards it, is it in a way even more exposing than a poem? Because a poem, in some sense, you've got more artifice, or you've got more like art. I'm not saying your memoir's not artful, obviously it is, but is there something even plainer about a memoir, which is, I don't know, is that scary or is that liberating?
Yeah, absolutely. What writing this book showed me is that, like I say there, I have used poetry as a way to hide behind the thought, because in poetry, I understand its function. I read a lot of poetry, and then when I'm moved by a poem, it makes me obsess over, what are the mechanics? How did the poet do this? Okay, great, now what's the equivalent move for me in my own work? That's kind of often how I read. And the secret with poetry is that, its power, I think, depending on your taste and your tradition or whatever, but for me, the poetry that really moves me, its power is image. It knows what to do with an image. And if there's more than one image, it knows how to transition from one image to another image. And the interesting thing is sign language, BSL, works in a similar way. It's a language, it's just an image. And when you see someone who can sign beautifully, it's because they're transitioning from image to image. It's seamless. So you might want to watch Sharon over there, the pro. Like, it's a similar thing. And so in memoir, in prose, I didn't have that safety net anymore. Because in the first draft of this, the feedback I constantly got was, see, you said this thing here, say more. Say more, say more, say more, say more, say more. And I'm like, I'm saying too much. Because often in poetry, you're taught, say less, say less, say less. Don't just say less, also put a hole in the truth. All right? So, and I think no, don't go off onto, I'm going to try not to become that person who says what poetry is, but I do.
On National Poetry Day.
On National Poetry Day. But I do think that is a thing that people often get wrong. The difficult thing about poetry is understanding what is mystery, what to do with mystery. It's not enough to just be like, just withhold information. You know what I mean? That's when the image comes in. If the image can stand in for some kind of emotional truth that you're trying to convey, which might not even make sense to the author, but feels right, and then can resonate with readers, that's difficult. And I'm obsessed with trying to do that in poetry. And here was this was, to be honest, this was difficult.
Right. Well, what this book does is it, as Ray's saying, it does stay in it doesn't turn away. It looks directly at a lot of difficult things. And it's really, really powerful. I want to get into a little bit of the story, and also, you grew up in Hackney. A lot of it's set in Hackney. As a Hackney audience, I think you're going to love reading this book for its many reasons. But there is something also great about feeling so close to it in a geographical sense. So, could you just? This is a beautiful chapter about both your parents' journey to where they met in Hackney at a squat party. Could you briefly tell us how they both got here?
Oh no. So my mom is in the audience.
Oh, is she?
So I'm wondering if my mom wants to tell that story instead of me. Do you want to tell that story, Mom? Do you want to come up here and tell that story, or shall I? Because if I say it, it's just going to be like, oh, you got that wrong. My mom said without digression. Impossible.
Impossible, yeah.
Impossible. No, okay, so I'm going to tell the story, Mum, and I'm going to look at you as I tell the story. And based on your face, I'm going to either add or subtract. My parents met in Hackney and at a squatters party in the late 70s, early 80s. Yes. This is how I had to write the whole book. And then... Not the late 1970s, but the early 80s. Right, early 80s. Yeah, that is... Yeah. No, it's in the book. My mum read the book before it was published. She signed off on it, so it's all right. I'm just trying to go off. See what you did, Joe? Got me in trouble. No, I didn't give you the heads up. They met at a squatters party in the early 80s, and my dad was there playing the music. He was there as a kind of amateur DJ. That's kind of what he did at the time. He did lots of little odd jobs, including, mechanics, making and fixing bikes and cars and motorized vehicles. He also was a painter, decorator, so he's kind of odd jobs kind of guy. But he played a lot of Sam Cooke. He loved Sam Cooke, and because I remember my dad telling me the story of how they met as well, so I kind of went on that. So yeah, he was playing Sam Cooke when they first made a kind of connection with each other, made eye contact with each other, and the detail that my mom gave me that I loved the most was that she said she kind of looked him up and down and stopped at his trousers and laughed because he was the only person wearing suit trousers, and that was quite unusual for a guy who's, in the early 80s. All guys are wearing jeans and but like suit trousers was an unusual thing. And then I'm going to skip a bit there. I'm going to skip a lot. Suddenly my sister was born. 4 years later, suddenly I was born.
Okay, so we've got your mum in the audience to fact check. Anytime you want to fact check something, you just raise your hand and we'll know that Ray has gone off. Okay, so 1986, you were born in Holborn Hospital, correct?
Yes, correct. Mum?
Yeah, confirmed on two independently confirmed. Yeah. And your parents didn't know you were deaf when you were born, right?
No.
And when did you and they know?
It was when my mom got this telephone, and I remember it. It was like this big cream, old school telephone. And I remember people always saying, "Oh, wow, that's a really loud telephone," and they put it downstairs, and I would never hear it. I mean, there was a question about whether I was being rude, about whether I was ignoring the telephone, and then eventually it was like, "Oh, okay, I think we need to test his hearing. Maybe that, there's a whole question." My aunt, my mom's sister, is a nurse, NHS nurse, and so my mom had a conversation with her about, we might have to test his hearing, and because as a healthcare professional, my aunt Felicity was able to be very non-alarmist about it, and was like, it might be grommets, it might be, all these things, but whatever it is, don't worry, we can get the support that he needs. Now I'm going to trigger everyone by talking about British politics at this time. This guy called Tony Blair comes to power and does this thing, which I consider myself a huge beneficiary of. So right now in the Labour Party, there's a whole thing about how the Labour Party doesn't have any message. Like, what is that message? Tony Blair, the political genius that he was, he understood how to deliver a message. So when you think of Tony Blair's early days, his message was what? Come on, Hackney. Boom. Education. And you know what? He did it. He actually did it. He came into power, and his government pumped so much money into education, which meant kids like me was able to get in-class support, note taker, hearing aids, radio aids. I got hearing therapy. I got basically I got a tutor. All of this stuff was paid for on the NHS, and I just really want to stress this doesn't exist anymore. And I go into deaf schools all over the country, all over the world. I have yet to see someone receive the level of care from an educational service that I got. And it's given me this like weird survivor's guilt, because I genuinely think that without that support and that care, I went from teachers looking at me and pathologizing me as dyslexic, as someone who could barely write. My writing was always like wonky. I couldn't write in a straight line. To like with focused care, within 4 years, and I speak about this in the book, like Renata and my mom's campaigning with Penny Wilds, Hackney teacher of the deaf. That's where my language, that's who I have to thank for my coherence. And so in becoming a poet and in kind of developing my identity through language, I'm so tethered to that reality. Like, I've been given this opportunity, I've been given these tools, I cannot waste them. I cannot. And so I was always passionate about poetry anyway. Again, both my parents, very passionate about poetry. My mom's even part of the William Blake Society. And my dad, being a DJ, loved the dub poets. So in his DJs, he would play Linton Kwesi Johnson and Miss Lou and Jean Beans of Breeze and Musa Baruka. So that was a big part of my education at home. So fused with, again, the education I got from Teachers of the Deaf, from the big budget from Tony Blair's government, it's a complex thing, isn't it? Because it's like, on one hand, yes, amazing, but then look at 4 years later what Tony Blair went on to do. So it's just a kind of reminder, like politics is so deeply complex that so few of us know how to navigate it or understand it. We're in this weird binary time as well, where people are so absolute about something that I think is so deep and murky and complex. And I think your memoir does this as well, you know, like really looking at some of these some of the ways that language is failing us in this time. And just trying to be understood in a way that, like, you understand. Yeah, so it's you know, that sigh is the exhaustion and the impossibility of what it is to really, like, articulate you know, politics and our time and what we're living through and what we're given, what we owe. Yeah, so I've gone quite abstract.
No, it's good. I feel like, you know, the book, that's what the book is doing. It is trying to articulate complexity and kind of sit within that complexity and not resolve it. And a lot of it is about, obviously it's all through your experience, about being not one thing or another, like not on a binary, you know, you can tell me, but, like, you know, deafness is as a spectrum, as you describe it, and you're positioned on this spectrum where certain kinds of people think you're not deaf enough, and certain kinds of people think you're, you know, you must be one thing to be considered deaf at all, and that's happening in all parts of your life. You know, it's like this sense of, being never quite fitting is like the theme of the book. This betweenness, in betweenness. I want to come back to, like, before you, I want to say discovered poetry, or poetry discovered you. I think it was there all along. But, like, there's an interesting period which you describe really beautifully through your teen years, where you're kind of feels like you're cycling through some identities in search of maybe one that works for you or fits for you. And I think it's Tabitha, your partner at the time, who says she's looked at these photos of you from your teen years, and she says, "Oh my God, you've been 10 different people."
Yeah.
So there's all these different identities, like, well, you can tell me, like, bodybuilding and hip hop, and there's like a gang moment and boxing, and, like, what was through those years? How did you feel, and what did you feel like you were looking for from all that, like, changing?
Yeah, I think I was looking for something that wasn't so ambiguous. One thing I didn't put in the book is I once braided my hair. I got, like, the braid. And when I did that, I realised it looked like Sean Paul. So I became Sean DePaul.
Why isn't that in the book?
Too obscure. People have forgotten about Sean Paul, but they shouldn't.
I haven't, no.
You haven't, I haven't either. Anyway, I could never find a coherent, cohesive, I guess, thing to be. And I know this isn't new. I know that most of us feel misunderstood, and I don't know. My version of that was. Some of the physical stuff of it. So even my dad, like, had this big afro, and then he had, like, dreadlocks, and then people would often just be like, "Oh, you're half Jamaican, you're Jamaican, blah blah blah." But then when they saw my dad, it was like the person who made sense. As soon as people saw my dad, they're like, "Oh," because I look a lot like my dad. And so he became this, like, I don't know, this kind of affirmation, physical affirmation about that. "No, see, there's my dad." It's like, "Oh yeah, I see it. Oh my God, you are black." So when you died, then it was like, oh, now there's no proof. Now it's gone. Now I have to. Where do I go to? Like, it's almost like losing your mirror. But as I've got older, and and matured, I think that this need to be recognized for what I am has lessened. And I guess that's one of the cliches about getting older. You start to care less about the perception of others on you. And I definitely do feel that. And I think being a dad, being a parent now, it also contributes to that. There's some dimension of noise that is diminished since becoming a parent. It's like, actually, this doesn't matter. Let me just pull that back and focus on how to, because now I'm the model,
right?
For him, for my son.
Yeah,
so,
Yeah,
so there's some kind of perspective gained through that, I think.
Massively. Like that's the kind of the like unexpected like revelation of, I guess, caring for a person. Is it's like, oh, what a relief to be kind of putting that on someone else.
Yeah, totally.
So, I have got tons of questions. I can't even get through them all, Ray. It's annoying.
It's all right.
Let's hear a poem, if you don't mind. It is National Poetry Day.
Yeah.
Ray is hopefully going to read a poem from, which book is it in?
Which?
It's the Deaf School
on
the Mississippi River poem, because then we can talk a little bit about.
Okay. Yes. So so I was going to publish this poem when I was living in New Orleans. I found this secondhand bookshop and picked up an anthology called The Quiet Ear. And in that anthology, they had a Ted Hughes poem called Deaf School, and the poem was written in the early 80s, around the time that my mummy met my daddy. And Ted Hughes was given, this poet, everyone knows who Ted Hughes is, I don't need to give him this, one of the most lauded, esteemed poets in the English language of the 19th century. And I am a fan. I will defend some of Ted Hughes' work, not his behaviour. But his work, I will defend it as great poetry. Anyway, sorry, that was a digression. Ted Hughes decides to go to a deaf school and sit in the corner and watch a lesson happening in a classroom in which deaf children are learning. And Ted Hughes writes this poem describing what he sees, and he uses certain phrases such as unaware, simple pool, lacking a dimension, removed from the vibration of air, alert, simple, lacked a subtle waving aura of sound and responsive to sound. On top of that, there's a lot of strange animal imagery and metaphors that occur throughout the poem. And so I read this poem, and for me it's a double assault. It hurts more because I liked Ted Hughes' poetry. Also, his book, The Making of a Poem by Ted Hughes, I think to this day is one of the best things written about how poetry functions. I kind of wish more people would read that, because then we might have... Sorry. What I said about symbol, about image, Ted Hughes really understood it. He writes about it beautifully. Anyway, The Makings of a Poem, brilliant. And so, anyway, Ted Hughes is writing, kind of using his poetic gift to attack, to dehumanize me. I could have been that kid. I could have been like, I was out at deaf school. Imagine the most revered poet of the English language came into my school, saw me signing and called me a monkey and published it. Like, what the Anyway, sorry. I wrote this poem in response using all of the phrases, or not all of them, some of the phrases, and directing it back to Ted Hughes. So in the poem, because I was in New Orleans and I understood what Ted Hughes' main poetic devices are: extended metaphor, personification, animal imagery. Those are his strengths as a poet. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna take the Mississippi River, which I'm sitting next to. I'm gonna personify the river. and I'm going to make it operate as a mirror, and it's going to, Ted Hughes is going to be looking at that mirror, and I'm just going to aim everything back at him. So for example, Ted is alert and simple. Ted lacked a subtle waving aura of sound of responses to sound. Ted lived through his eyes, but I, the colossal currents from the bridge, I, riverboats ghosting a geography of fog. Mississippi means big river, named by French colonizers. The natives laughed at their arrogant maps, conquering wind and marking mist. The mouth of the river laughs. A man in a wetsuit emerges, pulls misty goggles over his head. Couldn't see a thing, he breathes heavily. My face was in darkness. No one heard him. The river drowned him out. So what I wanted to do with that poem is publish the deaf school poem. So you read that verse and you see all the phrases, and then it follows by my poem called After Reading Deaf School by the Mississippi River. But the Ted Hughes estate not only didn't give me permission to use the poem, but sent quite a threatening letter saying that they would sue me if I did it. So what I had to do was another thing, which is I ended up publishing the poem anyway. But I published a poem like this, so that the shape of the poem is still existent. Then, after I'd published the poem, I went to a school in Hertfordshire, a deaf school, Knightsfield, and I shared this story with a room of deaf young people. And when I told them the story and I showed them this, I had one boy say, "Oh, turn the page this way." I did that. And he said, "Yeah, when I'm getting my cochlear implants fitted, that's what the screen of my audiologist looks like. Sound channels." And I thought, oh, perfect. And then I won the Ted Hughes Award, and then I bought new hearing aids. So just dwell on that for a second. He won the Ted Hughes Award with the book that has that poem in it. Did you have conversations with the Ted Hughes estate? Are they like after that? Did it change things? Or? No, yeah. So I was like, how has this happened? And because I would go and find that threatening letter from the Ted Hughes estate, and so turns out the reason it's called the Ted Hughes Prize is because of Caroline Duffy. So Caroline Duffy, thank you so much. I owe so much to Caroline Duffy. She just kind of felt like, yeah, I'm going to name it this prize, but it wasn't connected to the estate. So if the estate had their way, no, this poem wouldn't exist.
That's good. Did it feel good?
Yeah, it did. And getting a big hug, first from Caroline Duffy and then from Linton Kwesi Johnson.
Oh.
I was like,
I bet he hugs well.
Yes.
So we are approaching switching over to Q&A time, but I maybe have time for one or two more questions, and then we're also going to hear a bit more from the memoir, and then we're going to have Q&A. So we're going to move fairly swiftly. So I just want to talk a minute about your experience with sign language. And in the book, you kind of describe, I guess, again, like quite a complex relationship to the various kinds of sign language in your life. What was your experience as a younger person, learning it or not learning it, and where do you kind of sit with it now?
So I started learning it at 11 years old at Blanche Neville, secondary school, and I learned it. So Blanche Neville was this kind of school, like a unit, and which is part of a mainstream school. So quite a few of my lessons would be in there. But the thing that's really interesting to me again about the kind of imagery and the setup and the atmosphere of that for me was that this school is literally in the bushes. So you've got the big mainstream school, and then you have to go off the path into the bush, into the woods, to go to the deaf school. I always found that funny. So I learned the alphabet and to sign in this little shady room, hidden, and it felt hidden. And then I would emerge into the hearing school as if, I I have secrets.
Right.
I'm learning a secret language.
Right.
Don't tell anyone. And then I started using it, and then because of the time, I think I don't know if this would happen now. I think the sign has a different kind of social currency now, but I was kind of picked on for it, and I realized, oh, okay, because you know, as a kid at that time, I was obsessed with looking at, okay, how do I not get bullied? And there were certain things you have to do to not get bullied, and you can't attract too much attention to yourself. The sign was doing that. But my main card was I was good at sports, and I played for both the deaf Olympic team and the deaf football team, as well as a hearing team. And I was the captain of the swim team for the hearing team. And then there were times when the deaf school would play the hearing school. And so one of my proudest memories and proudest moments is choosing to play for the deaf team and beating the hearing school. That was a good day. It was a real good day.
Reminiscent of winning the Ted Hughes Prize, similar sort of.
It's the same thing. But yeah, I mean, so what you're talking about, like my kind of relationship with sign, I stopped signing after leaving school because I went out into the world and didn't really stay connected with the deaf world, and it's strange. I think a lot of that had to do with a kind of a misconnection and me not fully accepting that I was deaf. So much so that when I went back to my school 12 years later, and my same English teacher was there in the deaf school, Miss Willis at Blanche Neville, the first thing she said to me, before hello, before how are you, she said, "Raymond, have you accepted your deaf identity yet?" 12 years, she remembered me. I had not,
wow.
And I was like, oh, yes. And she was like, wonderful, give me a hug. And like going back to the school was an important kind of closing moment of that for me. And I often get asked, like, oh, how does poetry lead into, your style of poetry lead into your knowledge of sign language? And like, kind of picking it up again, I was like, oh yeah, I see what it's given me. It's given me a feeling for story, for language, and it's put it in the body. It's such a physical, embodied thing. So really, it's made me much richer as a person of language. BSL is a 500-year-old language. It's as old as Shakespeare. If we understood it and gave it a cultural capital that it deserved, we would be celebrating it. But it is on the way. I spent 7 years campaigning with Labour MP Rosie Cooper and Daniel Gillins, who at the time was 11 years old when we began the campaign to get BSL on the national curriculum. As of 2 years ago, we got it through, BSL charter, everything got signed, went through the Parliament. There's a whole weird thing with the Tories, because as they knew they were about to lose the election and they tried to hold it back. One of the reasons it's not been fully implemented yet is because the Tories they wanted to use it as a kind of feel-good story, like, look what we did. You know how, like, what Boris Johnson did with the bikes? The Tories are fucking amazing at messaging. This is what we can't get right on the left. Anyway, they just knew that this story would be a feel-good thing. Luckily, that didn't quite happen, because it turned out not enough people know or care about sign language yet for it to really have the social impact they wanted it to make. But it's coming. Next year, people will be learning BSL as a GCSE subject.
That's amazing.
Sorry,
that is so good.
Digression.
No, it's good. But this book really, again, one of the great things about this book is it gives you a sense of, like, the depth of the culture around BSL and the other types of sign language, and it gives you a really, like, powerful experience of that, and it really lands that in an amazing way. There's a right towards the end of the book, there's an amazing conversation. I think you're teaching in a school, and you get asked lots of questions. In fact, the book has many amazing questions in it, often asked to you by children. And one of the questions is it emotional to write a book? Which is a really great question. And you've got your mum in the audience today, and memoirs are just a lot to deal with. I have two questions. Is it emotional to write a book? One, I feel like I kind of know the answer, but I'm interested to hear. But also, how do you navigate when you're writing a book like this? You're writing about people who are alive, you're writing about current time and current people. What are the ways you kind of, you know, you said you gave your mum the book as like first refusal. Did you do that with everyone? Like, just how did you work the kind of practicalities of it?
Yeah, I didn't do that with everyone. I did it to my mum and my sister. Everyone else, oh well. But yeah, I mean, you know this. I mean, it's beyond emotional to write a book. Writing this was so, not to like get grandiose. I'm trying to, as my therapist says, come down from grandiosity. Come down. How do I say this without grandiosity? This book, I mean, the process of writing it was so, I was so obsessed with getting it done. I just knew it had to get done. I had a certain energy in me at the time to get through it. But it was making me spiral all the time when I came away from the page. And I couldn't be present, I couldn't focus, I couldn't be, you know, it was the first year being a parent at the time, and I think I did a lot of things that I regret. But like, but just in terms of like not being present enough, I wish I was a bit more present. But it really was the writing that was kind of pulling me away. I mean, I went to my therapist and kind of spoke a lot about this, and one of the revelations that my therapist said is, sounds like you have complex PTSD from all this stuff. So I thought, what complex PTSD? Isn't that something that people that have been to war experience? It's like, well, there's different, again, it's a spectrum. So yeah, I then started treatment for it, and it was correct. I needed that.
Wow.
I needed that. And yeah, man, writing a book, like kind of like, you know, a memoir. Yeah, if you're going there, if you're really going to your dirt, your pit, then you're gonna see some things that you're not gonna like. And if you're doing that work, that's what I mean. It's so weird, like to see this. Like we were talking about, like the celebrity thing of it, being like, oh look, I've got a book, I wrote a book. Da, da, da. This looks great, but like that stuff, like the conversation with your family, the stuff in therapy, the you know, that's not sexy. I couldn't pose like, hey, there's no Instagram post of me being like, here's me, my therapist, complex PTSD. Nah, man, like, it's not sexy.
Yeah.
It's not sexy. So on National Poetry Day, I would say that the best visual, best film, I think, that captures what truly writing a book is, I think I'm going to give it to Kill Your Darlings. Daniel Radcliffe is in it. If you haven't seen that film, Daniel Radcliffe kills it. It's something that made me really respect him as an actor. I'm like, you got it, you did it. Because it doesn't just show the writer doing this. It goes in, it understands the inner fuckery that you do to yourself to really arrive at something. It's so confusing, you don't know if you're wasting your time, the world is on fire, who the fuck cares? And now I'm just hurting myself doing this. Myself. Sorry, I'm really on one today. Wow.
I love it. Okay, on that note, look what all the struggle leads to. Let's have another little reading. Would you mind giving us a little bit from the book to finish, and then we're going to have Q&A?
Yes.
And yeah, that's the pain results in beautiful prose.
Oh, man.
So we shall hear that.
I'm sorry if that sounded grandiose. Oh, my pain! It hurts so much, but the writing is so good. So I'm going to read this section, which was from the arc. I am the grandson of a preacher. My granddad, J.K. Antrobus, was a preacher, and one of my favourite inheritances, heirlooms, is a box of his sermons. And I dig into this box and I read them, every now and then. And on the back of some of the sermons, there were little poems. So he was a poet. He was never published in his lifetime. So I think about that, that as a kind of inheritance as well. So in this section, I do a kind of roll call of a lot of the teachers of the deaf and a lot of the poets and deaf poets and deaf artists that have helped guide me into a kind of artistic realization, epiphany, if you will. And so you're going to hear a whole heap of names in this section. My sign name at school was R. Cat. Why? Because at school I hid. I grew out my hair. I would never cut it on the side, and I would make sure that no one could see my hearing aids. I mean, if I did cut my hair on the side, I always had a hood. So I was known as I wasn't trying to be a bad man. I was roadman. Roadman. I wasn't really trying to be a roadman. I was hiding. But when I got older, a friend of mine called Caroline Parker, an amazing deaf actress, she gave me a new sign name, and it was R. Sunshine. I did recently go on a date with a deaf woman who gave me a new sign name, though. So I'll share you this sign name that she gave me, because every time we see each other, we're eating. So this is R, right? So that's pretty good. So before I read this, I want to invite all of you to think about if there was an ark that you were going to board, in which you were going to bring everyone onto that ark who helps you be the person you are, who gave you the language you have, and you were traveling into the future with them, into this world that you're trying to make. Who are those people on the ark? And don't just think about the people that don't have complication. Think about the complication with those people. Do they get a space in your ark? I sometimes imagine an all-hearing God, a white cloud with one tiny ear and one giant ear, neither needing help from hearing aids, neither ear missing any sound. And this all-hearing God heard enough of the world and decided to destroy the all-hearing world in a great flood. And we, mere mortals, needed passage to the deaf world, to integrate it into a world we must share, a world where what is learned from speech and sign language and lip reading and caption screens in train stations and airports and hospital wards and classrooms is all part of the air. And my grandfather returned to earth as a voice to sermonize our salvation. Grandad JK, I'd say. We need an ark to connect us to the deaf world. We need deliverance from the wrath of this all-hearing God. And Grandfather JK would ask calmly, thoughtfully, as I feel the electric in my hearing aids meet the electricity of the question, who is on the ark? And I'd say, Granville Redmond is on the ark, his canvas wet with passing storms and luminous lakes. Dorothy Miles is on the ark, singing, signing, speaking, writing, all her gestures on deck. Johnny Ray is on the ark, and all his dancing static. David Wright, with or without deaf shame, is on the ark, and so is Goya, and all the animals in his black paintings, owls, elephants, bats, dogs, bulls, and large cats, and all the clean and unclean beasts are on the ark. My mother's telephone is on the ark, and so are all the teachers and interpreters of the deaf, Thomas Braidwood, Penny Wilds, Renata, Deborah, Alfred Evelyn Clark, Hashim Gazelle, Claudia Gordon, Antoinette Aiken, Tashi Widmer, forgers of good relationships, good listeners are on the ark. Grandfather JK would touch his moustache, knowing whom we were about to summon. Grandmother Barbara is on the ark, hands clasped, leaning back in her floral armchair, and so is Grandmother Dorcas, literate in land and wood and water. Donald Winnicott is on the ark, and so is the kind patience of Mr. Barry and Mark, the swimming coach, with his gestured poolside instructions. Who else is on the ark? Thomas Gray's poems and my father's handmade sound system. Every smooth and distorted syllable from Blake to Braithwaite. Every school of Miss Lou. Every dub of Linton Kwesi Johnson and Jean Vinter Breeze, John Agard and Adrian Mitchell, Gil Scott Heron, Muta Baruka, Michael Rosen. Every talking drum blares like Beethoven on the ark. Zephaniah's megaphone people power is on the ark. Malika's kitchen and all her silver and yellow carnival colours are on the ark. Poetry library librarians are on the ark, whispering, break a line over all the scribbling poet's shoulders. Meg Day is on the ark, and so is their phrase, deaf kin. Paddy Ladd's phrase, deaf hood. John Lee Clark's phrase, hearing canon. Aaron Williamson's phrase, deaf game. Harriet McBride Johnson is in her wheelchair and is on the ark, speaking and speaking and speaking, and John Kitto and Pierre Disloge and Jack Clemo's earthy hands are on the ark, and look, my old sign name, RCAP, is on the ark, and so is my new sign name, the BSL letter R that raises over the head to open out in all fingers out in the BSL word for light, shower, sun rays. All of it is on the ark, smelling like sweat, salt, rivers, oceans, blood, and blood.